Hi everyone. It's difficult to know where to begin to talk about an extraordinary and inexhaustible play by the Irish playwright J.M.Synge, John Millington Synge, whose dates are on the screen there. It was a play that debuted in 1907, and to give you a sense of chronology, that's 15 years before Ireland gained independence in 1922. And it was performed at the Abbey Theatre in Dublin, a theatre that was set up as Ireland's national theatre, run by Synge's friends and patrons, the poets W.B. Yeats and Lady Gregory. It was a play that is perhaps most famous for sparking some of the most notorious riots to have accompanied a theatrical performance in history. It was a play that, in the words of an anonymous reviewer in the Freeman's Journal, a nationalist newspaper, constituted an unmitigated, protracted libel upon Irish peasant men, and worse still, Irish peasant girlhood. And the charge of the play's anti-nationalism has been something that has dogged it over the decades since its first performance. In fact, it was so controversial that it wouldn't be performed in Ireland again until the 1960s, after its first performance. The anti-nationalist reception of the play is something that continues to persist in contemporary criticism. There are people out there who still, perhaps in more elaborate and nuanced language, still repeat this charge against the play. However, in more contemporary criticism, the play has been rehabilitated, and it has been rehabilitated in contemporary Ireland. If you study English literature in the Irish school system, I believe I'm correct in saying that the Playboy of the Western world is it's a very widely taught play. I think in the equivalent of A-level, the Leaving Certificate, it is one of the most taught plays. So it has been institutionally rehabilitated. The majority of contemporary critics, like me, would imagine that the play is an emancipatory document. It's a play that in some way endorses, or even could be said to preempt, the anti-colonial struggle that would eventually lead to Ireland's independence in the early 1920s. And this is perhaps because of the motif of violence that runs through the play. Ireland's independence was achieved through violence. Here is a famous quotation from the play. This is where the play's protagonist, a young man called Christy Mahon, who enters a village community on the western coast of Ireland in County Mayo. He boasts of having killed his father. He says, "I just rizzed the lawyer, I raised the spade, and I let fall the edge of it on the ridge of his skull, killing his father, who fell at my feet like an empty sack and never let a grunt or groan from him at all." But this event, which is really the main event of the play, this isn't a play where a great deal happens conventionally, occurs off stage, we never see it. Christy enters the village community as a timorous creature. He's described as timorous. And the community have to elicit this response from him, this admission as to what he's done. He asks them, that their sort of signal that he's done something occurs when he asks them, "Do the police often come here?" And they go, "Well, what is it you committed? Was it theft? Was it this? Was it that? It must be something big." Yes, it was something big, and indeed it was something big. He killed his father. He's eventually lionised by the village community. It's a 3-act play, and in the second act, he really just becomes the toast of the village community. He gets the girls come round to him with offerings of chickens and various produce, and he takes part in a sporting competition, and he wins all the sports. And it's all going well for Christy until at the end of Act 2, his father enters the stage alive and well. Initially, he enters only before Christy and one other character, and they persuade him to go away. But he later comes back in the 3rd act, and this time it's before the entire cast. And confronted with the reality of the fact that this crime wasn't actually committed, that Christy isn't a parasite, somebody who killed his father, they attempt to purge him from the community. They themselves enact an extraordinary violence towards him. They tie him up. Pegeen, the young woman who he's courting, actually tries to burn him with a lighted sod. And the villagers are deterred from killing him, which is what they propose to do. And at the end of the play, he and his father, Christy and his father, depart the stage, by implication to wander the roads of Ireland. This picture here is a picture of the General Post Office in Dublin during the Easter Rising of 1916. So this is 9 years after the play's debut, and this is really just to crystallise the theme of violence. And there are some critics out there, and myself included, who would suggest that the Playboy relates to this event in some way. It obviously focuses on the theme of violence. There are people out there who posit some sort of causal connection between the play and this event. I think it's difficult to substantiate, but it's definitely something that I would like to endorse. But it is very difficult to diagnose Synge's attitude towards the use of violence. What stance does he take? I mean, there is an extraordinary amount of critical debate, and there has been for, you know, a century or so since the play's production. I mean, scholarly consensus is by no means unanimous on this. In my opinion, I would suggest that Synge advances a criterion of meaningful violence. If you are going to perpetrate a violent act, it has to be meaningful, and your violence and the rhetoric has to match up. And I wouldn't say that the play is a sort of moralistic lesson against empty rhetoric. I think it's much more focused than that. I think it does hinge on the idea of violence that has to be meaningful, that has to do something. But there can be no doubt, whatever we are meant to think of Christie and whatever we're meant to think of the act of violence that he claims to have committed, that his boast, this notion that he has killed his father, effects an extraordinary change on the world of the stage and the characters who populate it. And this is something that I find fascinating, and I really don't think it's been accounted for adequately in the criticism. I really don't. Here is an extract from the play which documents the effect that it has. Having elicited the information from him that he killed his father, the Christie, who is this timorous little creature, he becomes a sort of talisman against colonial authority. It's said that the Peelers is fearing him, the police, the Royal Irish Constabulary at that time, and they wouldn't dare to enter the village with Christie there. Pegeen, his love interest, said, "I wouldn't be fearing the lucid khaki cutthroats or the Walking Dead," referring to the British Army. So long, guys. The theory which I found, which I feel really encapsulates what happens, is a theory that, I mean, it's not contemporary to the play at all. It was elaborated by a French philosopher called Louis Marin in his work on what he termed utopic. So discourses of utopia, of ideal social orders, ideal societies. He says that utopic practice is the overthrow of law by discourse, and that is quite literally what we see in the extract that I showed. The parricide, the act of killing his father, the act of everybody's talking about it, discussing it, imagining it, quite literally banishes the law represented by the police and the army from the village community. I don't think that I don't think there's anything to laugh about. I mean, the Playboy is a very, very funny play, but there's nothing to laugh about in terms of this transformation and in terms of what the parricide, this image, this symbol of killing the father, represents. Maran says that utopia is a space organised as a text, and I would contend this is what happens to the world of the stage. The space, the village community, the west of Ireland that it represents is organised, its social relations, its social structure is completely transformed by the text of Christie's admission, of his boast, of this idea and this symbol of killing the father. Everything changes. The colony is banished. Christie becomes the hero. He becomes the centre of the community. This becomes a world in which Christie, who is this diminutive figure, can win all the sports, has an immense physical prowess, becomes a hero. It is extraordinary. The world of the stage is imagined, therefore, as a space apart from the colony, from the rest of contemporary Ireland, which is at this time colonised. Maran suggests that utopic discourse institutes a sudden distance by which contiguities and continuities of time and space are broken in historical narrative and in the contemplation of geographic space. So spatially and temporally, this world, Mayo, the world of the stage, the world it represents, is situated as a temporal and a spatial afterwards. It's situated after a momentous event which completely alters the nature of the space. But this is only possible as long as Christie's boast, the idea of the parasite, the notion of him killing his father, holds true, as long as it's believable, as long as it isn't disproved, and as long as it refers in the minds of the villagers to an event that actually happened, it's believable, it means something. And what happens when Christie's father, Old Mahan, comes back onto the stage is that the parasite is falsified, it's completely falsified, and it ceases to possess any sort of function or any ability to sustain this space apart. And that, that precipitates the end of the play, in which colonial relations are reasserted on the space. My reading of the play differs markedly from perhaps the most well-known and eloquent proponent of the Playboy as an anti-colonial document, Declan Kyberd, who is, one of the biggest authorities, not just on Synge, but in Irish studies generally. He suggests that the Playboy follows a tripartite structure, which he borrows from the post-colonial theorist Frantz Fanon. He suggests, and he reads this, and this is a very nuanced and convincing reading. He reads through the body of Christie that Act 1 constitutes a symbolic occupation, Act 2 a nationalism, so a movement to try and overcome occupation, and Act 3 liberation. And rather implausibly, I think, he suggests that the image of Christie and his father, who depart the play at the end, are the image of the new revolutionary community, which I personally don't think holds true. What I think is actually, it's Act 1 which constitutes the sort of high point of the play, if you're going to look at it as an anti-colonial document, and it's Act 3 which actually tends towards the restoration of colonial relations. But what if, in contradistinction to Kyberd, we're not actually meant to be focusing on Christie so much as the community and the effect that his words and his actions have on the community? We have to bear in mind that this play was first performed in front of a very politicised nationalist audience at the Abbey Theatre, and I would suggest that the Playboy supposes that the world that we've lost, the post-colony that temporarily and fleetingly comes into being, is something that we should seek to emulate, that we ourselves as an audience, putting myself in the position of the audience at the original production, should attempt to should ourselves attempt to revive. And how can we do that? I would suggest that the only way we can do that is to match our violent deeds with meaning. Thank you.
You said, you've analysed how you would have responded to the play as a